A year has gone by and we're still struggling horribly with the coronavirus pandemic, so this is another video for the Basingstoke Beekeepers course. I'm going to be discussing the construction of standard hives. Hopefully you'll be getting your vaccinations when the time comes. It's the only way out of this mess. And if you're frightened of needles, well, spoiler alert, every worker bee has got a hypodermic in her back end.
So today we're talking about the construction of a hive. There's lots of different hives. They all work in pretty much the same way. We'll start with the floor. This is an open mesh floor. The idea of these is that the varroa mites on the bees sometimes drop off, and if the bottom of the hive is open they'll fall out onto the ground and die. It's not enough to control varroa on its own, but the idea is it does help. Underneath the floor you get a monitoring board, and the idea of this is that you can count the number of varroa that drop out. So most of the time you leave the board out. Once in a while you put it in, count the varroa that drop out over a week or so, and that gives you an idea of the varroa load in the hive. Next we come to the entrance block, and straight away we're into an area where beekeepers disagree with each other. A lot of beekeepers keep the entrance block in all year round because the bees like a smaller entrance and they're able to defend it. Some beekeepers prefer to take the entrance block out during the summer because they think it gives the bees more room to get in and out without forming traffic jams. My view is that the bees have flown a few miles, so if they have to wait a few seconds to get in through the front, that's no real hardship. I have had hives robbed out by wasps, so my feeling is to keep the entrance block in all year round. But the disagreement doesn't stop there. Some beekeepers keep the block in that way up, that is that the hole is a little bit off the floor, and the rationale behind that is that if you get a lot of bees dying, particularly in the winter, they'll form a layer on the bottom board, but the bees will still be able to get in and out, so the entrance won't get blocked. Other beekeepers, me for example, prefer the entrance block that way up with the entrance at the bottom, and the way we think about that is that if there are dead bees in the hive, the bees can get them out through the entrance easily. It also means if you're examining your hive, you can stick a bit of wood in or whatever and scrape out a few dead bees if that's necessary. You pay your money and you take your choice. Next we have the brood box, and this is where the queen does all her laying, and this is where she raises all the brood, and this is where the brood nest is. And inside that you'd have removable frames. Now here in the south of England you really need quite a large brood box because the colony will get quite big, so you really need a larger brood box. This is the national type of hive, but it's the extra large brood box they're generally called 14 by 12. I haven't got the standard size available to show you, but we do have a couple of frames. You can see this is from the standard box and this is from the 14 by 12, and you can see it's quite a bit taller, so you get a bigger nest that way. So inside the brood box you have runners, that's these here, that the frames rest on. Now these are metal runners, and if you've bought a cheap hive kit, it may come with plastic runners instead. These are rubbish. They're not very strong, and because they're made of plastic you can't flame out the inside of the box to sterilise it either. So I always use metal runners, and you'd fit frames with foundation on, and then the bees would build it up like they started to do on this one, until they can build a nest inside there. you can either fill the box entirely with frames, or you can leave out the back frame and put in a dummy board. Now, these are smaller, narrower than the full frame would be, and the idea of that is that once the bees have been working in here, there's propolis and wax and so on. This one frame at the back is easy to get out, and then you've got room to move the rest of the frames around. And that's the way I do it. Other beekeepers prefer to have a full complement of frames. In the national box, that's 12 I think rather than 11, so they got more room for the nest, and it's what you like. I personally don't like to try and gouge out the back frame, because it'll be covered in bees and they'll scrape across each other and so on. But other beekeepers get by fine, so whatever takes your fancy. So that's where the queen lives, and that's where the brood nest goes. And then on top of that you put a queen excluder. And the idea of the queen excluder is the gaps in this mesh are too small for the queen to go through, but they're just big enough so that the workers can get through. And that goes on the top of the box here. Again, if you've bought a cheap and cheerful kit, you probably got one of these plastic queen excluders. Again, these are horrible. The idea is, with national boxes at least, the frames come up to the top of the box, so the queen excluder just lies on the top there and its weight is supported by the frames. What happens is the bees glue it down with propolis all the way across, and then when you take it off you have to peel it off from the edge, and it generally goes ping and it throws bees into the air and they're all livid with you straight away. So I never use these except in emergencies. Spend the extra money and get yourself a proper wire one like this. So you've got your queen excluder, that stops the queen getting up further in the hive. The next thing on the hive is the super, one or more supers, and these are the boxes where the bees are going to collect the honey. So if you look in here, you've got frames. They're smaller because this will be a heavy object when it's full of honey. If you're clambering across the fields or whatever, you wouldn't be able to move a honey box this big. I wouldn't be able to. You may be bigger and stronger than me. So that goes on the top of there. Now, if I can get these frames out, because they're all glued in. Come out. We'll now pause the video. There we go. That's got the frame out. So in the top, in the supers, what you've got is castellated runners. So it's got a metal sheet across here with square holes in it, and those hold the super frames in one position. Like most things with beekeeping, there's more than one way of doing things. You can have self-spacing frames like you've got in the brood box, or you can have frames that don't space themselves at all and then you add spaces. All sorts of different arrangements. This is the one I use. So you've got one or more supers. Queen can't get into here, so these frames get filled up with honey only. And on the top goes the roof. Now this roof has holes in, you can just see there. Several reasons for that. First reason is ventilation. Another reason is if you put a feeder on the top of here, then the bees can come up through the holes to get to the feeder. The third reason is that you can use the crown board, I call it roof, this is a crown board, for extracting bees from the super. When this super is full of honey, you need to get the bees out of it so that you can take the box away and extract the honey. And then what you do is you put these bee escapes, this is a porter bee escape, there are other types, into the holes in the lid. Now the thing with these is that the bees can come down through the hole, but inside here there are little metal springs that stop them getting back out again. So if you put this underneath the super, like that, hive after a day or so of activity, all the bees that were in here will have made their way down into the brood box and then can't get back again. And then you can come and collect the super. There'll be few, if any, bees left in it, and you can take it away and extract the honey. Very important to make sure there are no gaps anywhere in the super or between the super and the roof, because bees are devils for robbing each other, and if there's any way for bees to get into here, they'll be straight in nicking the honey. A mate of mine did a bodge repair job on the edge of one of his supers, and there was a sort of letterbox sized gap, and he came back the next day and the box was empty. All the other bees, probably mine included, had robbed the whole thing out. Right, so that's the super and the crown board. We'll pop that back into the normal order this will be used in. And then on the top of the crown board goes the roof, which is waterproof. It's got ventilation holes in it, and that just plonks on there. Now the whole thing is just held together by its weight and any propolis that the bees happen to stick on there. So you may want to put a large block on the top of there, or put a strap round of some description. I use ratchet straps myself because they're easy to carry around. So that's what a normal beehive looks like. A couple of extra things you may want to do. You will probably need eeks at some point. And the eek is just a little bit of an extra box that you can use inside the hive to give yourself a little bit of extra gap. So a narrow one like this might be used if you want to put a block of fondant or some varroa treatment on top of your brood box. And say a deeper one like this would be if you had a large feeder that you want to put in on top of the hive. You can buy these, but they're easy enough to bodge together out of bits of wood yourself. So there we go. That's the layout of a normal hive. This hive is National Hive, but there are other types in this area of the world. You'd probably also come across Langstroth hives. They're built in pretty much the same way, but the shapes are different, and I'll just briefly discuss the shape changes in a moment. So just a little extra discussion about the difference between national boxes and Langstroth boxes. In this part of the country you're just as likely to come across either type. I would not tell you which one's best. The bees don't really care. It's down to the preference of the beekeeper. I actually run bees on both. I wouldn't recommend that. You really should just stick to one type, whatever one you like. The reason why I've got both is because I acquired some bees in some Langstroth boxes when I already had bees in national boxes. Right, the national box is square, which means you do have the choice as to how you orient the frames. So you put it this way around with the frames running back to front. That is the so-called cold way. The idea being that air can blow in through the front and spread around the frames, or you can put it in the so-called warm way, like that, with the frames parallel to the entrance, and that's the so-called warm way, but the idea being that the air can't blow in so easily and around the frames. Doesn't make any difference to the temperature anymore. We've all got open mesh floors, so it's just the name of it. It doesn't make any difference to the temperature of the hive at all. So it's really down to how you like to work your hives. My hives are on fairly high stands and I've got fairly long arms, which means it's convenient for me to stand behind the hive. The bees are all out there, so they don't bother me as much, and I can reach all the frames easily and work through the hive. So that's the national box. Now if we look at a Langstroth box, this one here, this is old and knackered, but you get the idea. It's oblong, this distance here is shorter than that distance there. You can also see that this has got plastic runners in it, and they're all bent and buckled and knackered, which is why I prefer metal ones. So for the Langstroth boxes, you don't have a choice. That's the entrance. These are the frames. This is a super frame, but you get the idea. So you have to work that way. It's not a big deal, and if you like, you can stand by the side of the hive and work this way. It really doesn't make any difference. It's just what you get used to. So other things to note about the Langstroth hive. It's a simpler construction. You see, you've got these little handholds on the side there, whereas with a national frame, or a national box, you've got much better grips, which I quite like. So especially with supers or whatever, which can be very heavy, you get a good firm grip on it. That said, the construction of the national box is clearly more complicated. So if you're into DIY, the Langstroth boxes are simpler to build. As far as the frames go, you can see on a national frame you have rather longer lugs on the side there compared to the lugs on the Langstroth. Which way around? That way around. You can see it's quite a bit shorter. Again, you just get used to them. If you are using a national box, I would recommend using a J tool, because you can get the J tool in to leave them out more easily. But again, we'll get used to it, whatever you like. The other thing about national boxes compared to Langstroth boxes is where the magic bee space is. You can see the top of the frame is flush with the top of the box, so there's no bee space here. The bee space is in the box that goes on top of this, and for that reason that's called bottom bee space, because the bee space is in the bottom of the box above here. On the other hand, with Langstroth hives, this one here again, the frame drops down below the edge of the box, and this is called top bee space because the bee space is in the top of the box. For that reason, a queen excluder for a Langstroth box does need to have more strength to it than with the national box, because it's not supported in the middle, so you'll almost certainly be using a wire queen excluder, which are better anyway. Now, the next thing is, because the boxes are completely different shapes, the equipment is incompatible between the two. You can't use Langstroth boxes with national boxes. They just don't fit together at all. Let's just see if I can show that. Oops. Yeah. Right. So, if you try to put a Langstroth box on a national box, you can see it doesn't fit there and it doesn't fit here. So it's a non-starter. The only time you might want to join Langstroth and national equipment is if you were trying to move bees from one type of equipment to the other, which I did do when I first acquired some of these Langstroth boxes. And then you will need to make something like this, which is a sort of adapter board that's bodged together out of plywood. And the idea is the outside dimensions are equivalent to the outside dimensions of these two boxes, and the inside hole is equivalent to the inside hole of here. So if we plonk this on top, you can see that it fits the national box there. We put the Langstroth box on top, and you can see that it also comes back far enough so that the box, there's no way in for the bees to get around the side, and there's a little entrance cut into the thing just there. So what you do if you wanted to get bees from, say, the national box on the bottom into Langstroth equipment on the top, you put a queen excluder in, and you'd have this entrance for the bees to use, and then the bees, you move the queen from the bottom box into the top box, and then the bees would raise what young is left in the bottom box and build a new nest in the top box, and then when it's all transferred, you'd take the Langstroth box off, and away you go. So hopefully you'll find some of that useful.